Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really significant document,
Mm
the Powell Memorandum.
That confidential memo from Lewis F. Powell Jr. in 1971.
Exactly. Written right before he joined the Supreme Court, actually. He sent it to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
And the core idea of the thesis was that the American free enterprise system was facing this huge sustained attack.
Yeah, a broad attack, he called it.
Mm.
So our mission today is to unpack the context, what he actually argued, and, well, its lasting impact.
Absolutely. And you really have to step back into the early 1970s to get it.
Right. What was going on then?
Well, think about it. Massive societal shifts. You had the civil rights movement really hitting its stride, huge anti-Vietnam War protests.
The women's rights movement gaining momentum.
Environmental awareness taking off. Earth Day started in 1970. And consumer advocacy, people like Ralph Nader really making waves.
So a lot of questioning of established norms and institutions?
Definitely. And the business community felt that pressure intensely. They felt, well, kind of under siege.
From government regulation?
Regulation, yeah, but also campus activism, media criticism. Powell's memo basically framed it as this massive assault and asked, okay, what's the business response going to be?
And Powell himself, he was a major player, wasn't he? Not some
Oh,
academic.
absolutely. A very prominent corporate lawyer, represented huge companies like Philip Morris, served on, I think, 11 corporate boards, even led the American Bar Association. So deeply connected.
And then nominated to the Supreme Court just, what, less than 2 months after writing this?
Yeah, the timing is striking.
Okay, so Powell sees this attack. Who did he think was behind it? Who were the attackers in his view?
It was pretty broad, actually. He mentions communists, the New Left,
Right.
you know, those 60s and 70s movements focused on social justice,
Mhm.
but also academics, intellectuals, the media, even some mainstream politicians he felt were getting swayed. It wasn't just one group.
So less a conspiracy, more like a shifting tide of opinion he was worried about.
Kind of, yeah, an ideological shift against the whole system as he saw it.
Right. So what did he suggest business do about it? What was the game plan?
His recommendations were pretty strategic, aimed at influencing things across the board.
Like what specifically?
Well, in media, he urged businesses to actively monitor news and entertainment, critique it, push for more pro-business views.
Okay. What about education? Campuses were a big focus for him, right?
Huge. He talked about achieving faculty balance, scrutinizing textbooks for anti-business bias, really trying to shape the intellectual environment long-term.
And politically.
More aggressive lobbying, definitely. Supporting pro-business candidates much more systematically. He even suggested getting more involved in the judicial system, using the courts.
It sounds incredibly comprehensive, a plan to fight back on basically every front.
It really was a blueprint for sustained engagement.
So this memo was confidential at first. What happened when it got out?
It was leaked in 1972, after he was already on the Supreme Court, which you can imagine caused a stir. Within the Chamber of Commerce, it was well received initially. But publicly, especially given his new role, critics saw it as, well, a plan to stifle dissent and exert corporate power.
Okay, so controversy. But did it actually do anything? Did it have a real impact?
Oh, absolutely. Historians like Kim Phillips-Spain point out that many business leaders explicitly cited the memo as inspiration later on.
So it lit a fire under them.
You could say that. It's widely seen as a catalyst, maybe the key catalyst, for a much more assertive, politically organized business community.
And that connects to the rise of certain organizations, doesn't it?
Directly. Think about the growth of conservative think tanks and advocacy groups. The Heritage Foundation, AEI, the Cato Institute, ALSE.
Right, Heritage is famous for its policy influence, like the mandate for leadership.
Exactly. And foundations like Coors, Olin, Scaife, Bradley, they started channeling significant funding into these groups, supporting the kind of intellectual and political infrastructure Powell envisioned.
And Powell being on the Supreme Court himself.
Yeah.
How did that play out? Did his ideas influence the court?
That's a crucial link. The memo really foreshadowed this push for greater corporate rights under the Constitution, especially First Amendment speech rights applied to political spending.
So cases like Buckley v. Vallejo.
Buckley fits the pattern, defining spending as speech. And First National Bank of Boston v. Bilotti Powell actually wrote the majority opinion in that one, striking down limits on corporate spending on ballot initiatives.
And that paved the way for later decisions.
You could argue it laid groundwork. It certainly fixed the trajectory leading towards Citizens United, which dramatically opened the door for super PACs, and so-called dark money in politics.
It also feels like this aligns with that whole push against regulation and the explosion in lobbying.
Precisely. The numbers are stark. Corporate public affairs offices grew massively. Registered lobbyists in D.C. went from, say, 175 in the early 70s to nearly 2,500 a decade later.
Wow, that's huge growth.
And corporate political action committees, PACs, went from under 300 to over 1,200 in the same period. A much more organized, well-funded presence.
So, connecting this to today, this memo is 50 years old, but it sounds like its echoes are still around.
Very much so. You can see threads and ongoing debates about corporate money in politics, obviously. Also in critiques of higher education as being too left-leaning.
Efforts to roll back environmental or other regulations.
The structure and funding of conservative media networks, arguably. Even current strategic initiatives like Project 2025, which outlines a conservative policy agenda, many of the underlying goals and strategies resonate with what Powell laid out.
It seems the core ideas, the strategies, they haven't gone away.
They continue to shape a lot of the political landscape, particularly on the conservative side.
Okay, so that leaves us, and you listening, with a really interesting final thought to chew on. How much can one single document, like the Powell Memorandum, actually reshape a nation's path? Versus how much was it just capturing the mood, reflecting deeper forces that were already moving anyway?
Was it a radical blueprint that changed everything, or more a sign of the times articulating something that was perhaps already starting to happen?
Something for you to think about. That wraps up our deep dive for today.